Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pensive Politics with Mr. Watson. I am your host, Christian Watson, and today I have an extraordinary guest, Mr. Daniel Di Martino. He is a Venezuelan exile, the right word, expat, something of that sort, who has been very active in America, voicing his opinions and his experiences with the terrible, wretched socialism that has run rampant in his home country of Venezuela under the atrocious leader Maduro. Daniel, how are you doing today, my friend?
Hi, Christian. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Good. Great. And so COVID-19 has really shook the world to its core. We see all manner of things happening. We see in the Philippines, the leader over there threatening to kill people who violate quarantine. We're seeing in Wuhan people get upset over rent and who are complaining that the numbers might be fudged or whatever, what the Chinese are doing. And then you also see here in America, the governor of Michigan threatening to lock people up if they do not abide by her dictates, and the governor of New Jersey saying that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is above his pay grade. Apparently, I didn't know that a public official didn't have to abide by those things, but according to him, they don't. And so my question is, in Venezuela, where you come from, where you have been so outspoken about, how is COVID affecting Guaido and the freedom movement down there, and what future do you see for the freedom movement in Venezuela after COVID subsides?
Well, COVID is affecting every Venezuelan in a very negative way right now. The government has attempted to implement a sort of national lockdown. However, that's not really a choice for the overwhelming majority of Venezuelans who need to work to eat, right? In Venezuela, if you don't work, you die of starvation. So for most people who need to get out to work, the choice is not really, they don't really have a choice, right? It's either they starve today to die or they just risk infection with COVID and perhaps die, but the likelihood is much less than not having food at home. So that's what the government has tried to do, and that's negatively affecting especially the poor. They put checkpoints in the street. They only allow doctors to fuel their gas tanks and the military because there's also a gasoline shortage as we speak. In fact, while you see gasoline going for record low prices right now in the United States, Venezuela,
Right.
the country with the most oil in the world, has one of the most expensive gas prices right now. It's about $6 a gallon in the black market. Bribing military officials to get it. So that's the real market price. So COVID has really changed a lot for Venezuelans, right? It's a lot more repression, a lot more government oversight, and there's really no space for protests or anything related to, taking back our country.
Absolutely. And so where do you see the freedom movement going after COVID has subsided? Because eventually it's bound to subside. I'm not sure when. The timeline has actually been very indecisive. It's contingent upon the expertise of the current medical intelligentsia, which are currently trying to figure this thing out. It's unknown how long this thing is going to last. But when it does inevitably end, because everything naturally has to have an end, where do you see the freedom movement going? Do you see Guaido being able to make strides, as he did, I think, early last year, to galvanize international attention and wrest power from Maduro? Or do you see a very lethargic, limping freedom movement in Venezuela that might not be able to do much of anything at all?
So I think that it's not really tied to COVID, but after it passes, we're just going to return to where we were before, in the best scenario, I think. And that is that Guaido is just going to, keep doing what he was doing, which is just calling for more sanctions and perhaps negotiating with the government, with the regime.
Right.
And I don't think that he's capable of bringing about the change that Venezuelans need to regain our freedom. I don't think he's capable because he has had a chance for nearly a year and a half. And the only thing he has done is bring about some humanitarian aid inside smuggled. And that's all he has achieved. In addition, of course, he has achieved a lot, not himself, but the United States has done a lot to try to help us. But that has more to do with the Trump administration's commitment than with Guaido himself. It could be anyone else, and the Trump administration would have done the same actions.
Right.
So my concern now is that Maduro is riding the COVID wave of, more repression than ever. Nobody's paying attention to Venezuela until the November 2020 election in the US. He's hoping Trump doesn't get reelected, so that when Trump doesn't get reelected, he'll know that Joe Biden is not going to do anything about Venezuela, just like Obama didn't.
Right, absolutely, and Obama actually has an atrocious legacy all across South America, supporting dictators and things of that sort. So he's actually, unfortunately, he has had the opposite effect on that region's stability. Um, do you believe Guaido needs to go for the freedom movement in Venezuela to have any juice to it?
Yes. And it's not just him. It's that, you see, this is a very smart dictatorship, Christian. And this is something that happens in many countries in the world, and people in the free world don't really understand fully. And it's that
Right,
dictators, to keep power, the smartest ones, they create fake oppositions. And it's not like everyone in the opposition is fake, but they infiltrate the oppositions with people who are actually loyal to them, and they just pass them information. And inside the Guaido government, there's a lot of those people. And I'm not saying that Guaido himself is. I don't know him personally. I can't attest to him. But I do know
right.
that people around him are, for sure, right? These are people who have a
Goodness.
history of that. They were Chavistas before. They worked with Chavez. Guaido himself is open with to bringing them about in a future government. And, you know, Elliot Abrams recently, the special envoy of the US government to Venezuela, was talking about how South Africa did a transition and Nelson Mandela didn't jail anyone, and you need to negotiate to do these things. And that's true. But the problem is that in Venezuela, we don't have anything to negotiate with Maduro. What are we going to give Maduro that he wants so that he gives him power? The South
Precisely.
African dictatorship was not a criminal enterprise that smuggled drugs into other countries. It was a brutal racist dictatorship, true. But this is a criminal enterprise that is profiting from staying in power. They
Right.
could leave any point, they right now Maduro could pack his bags, go to Cuba, all the generals could do the same and keep all their money. Nobody would, catch them in Cuba. But they don't, because they can keep making money. And while they can keep making money, they're going to stay.
Absolutely. And I think that Guaido has shown himself to be manifestly unreasonable. I'm more than positive that you remember one of the first things he did when he was in office. He began seizing golf courses from from what they would call the bourgeoisie down there in Venezuela. He began seizing private property. This is not someone who really can be negotiated, because when we say the word negotiate, when we say the word haggle, when we say the word diplomacy, we are thinking largely within the confines and under the auspices of the capitalistic system of exchange. But this is something that these people are immune to, that dictators especially are immune to. And so I think that what you're seeing there is an importation of a lot of Western hopefulness and optimism trying to make its way into the situation. But as you said, it's probably not the best way to
There's
handle
also
people
a
like
lot of
this.
collaboration going on, Christian. Spain, for example, has delayed and allowed Hugo Carvajal, who was recently indicted in the United States, and he was due to be
Mm,
extradited to America for drug trafficking. He's a Venezuelan official. Um,
yeah.
he was due to be extradited. They let him escape. There are
Yeah.
reports that also Spain's central bank is helping Maduro move money in the international financial system.
Mm,
In Spain, there are tens, if not hundreds, of what we call in Venezuela enchufados, which it's a Spanish word for the plugged in. People who profited from the regime took all their gains and went to other countries to live off the great life. And that's where they're going right now in Spain, because they know in the US they're going to be persecuted.
right. And yeah, exactly. Because I know that the Trump administration actually seized the assets of several Venezuelan officials somewhere in Florida during the first few years he was in office.
That's right. Yeah. In
So
fact, the first week that Trump was in office, he started taking action on Venezuela.
absolutely. Let me ask you a question here before we go on to the next topic. Uh, do you believe that so you believe in free markets and everything, I assume, right?
Of course, yes.
And
I think that
okay,
the only way for Venezuela to prosper is to privatize, the oil industry, to dollarize our
Yes.
economy, to stop inflation, and to eliminate all the regulations that destroyed it in the first place, like price controls.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. What do you think of the contention that these Venezuelan dignitaries, these Venezuelan officials, if they have private property in a place like America, whose foundation is the protection of private property as a matter of individual and natural rights, what do you think of the argument that even though they're using their private property to enrich themselves and to perhaps fund a criminal enterprise in their own home country, uh, they should have their property should still be considered as sacred as everyone else's property in the country.
Well, it's not their
Meaning,
property; they stole it from someone else.
mm, mm,
That's not private
mm-hmm,
property. Private property doesn't have national boundaries,
mm-hmm,
unless you
mm-hmm.
believe that rights only exist in the United States and whatever
No,
happens
of course
outside
not.
is meaningless, which I don't think
Right,
that that's the case. If somebody steals in one country and takes their profits to another country, that's still a crime.
right, absolutely. It's a violation of natural law, as the
So if
laws would
if
say.
they had gained their money rightfully, in Venezuela, selling things and making nice profits, that would be their property, but that's not the case, right?
Right. Interesting. Very interesting. All right. That sounds. I've never heard it put like that before, but that makes perfectly much sense to me, as it does otherwise. Speaking of Venezuela, you have risen, and you might hesitate to say this term, but I'll say it. You've risen to stardom, not too over the past year or so. You're advocating for freedom, and you have advocating for freedom in Venezuela and free markets around the world. How has that been for you? Because you came here, I believe you got a full ride to go to the university you went to in Indiana. You came here, just someone who had experienced the sheer material horrors of socialistic nonsense, and now you are able to harness the energy of the free market to literally spread the message of capitalism. How has it been for you, and what have you learned so far in your journey of speaking, of appearing on CNN, of going on Fox, of meeting President Trump? What has been the biggest lesson to you that has stood out?
Wow. Well, the biggest lesson I think from being able to, having the privilege to speak my mind to other people, which is what really is, even though it should be a right in Venezuela, but it's a privilege, unfortunately, there. Um, it's that a lot of things are just in God's hands, right? And I
Yes.
never expected to, like, for example, meet President Trump. It's something that I always dreamed about, because I wanted to tell him what I thought, and I had that chance, which was just unbelievably great. And I love talking with people about this, so it's something that I loved from before, and I love doing it now, and I want to continue doing it forever. Because I think that, well, at least as long as it's needed, right? I hope that I don't
Right.
need to do it forever, right? I hope that socialism just stops existing. But I doubt that that's going to happen. So I'm probably going to be doing this for the rest of my life.
No, it's an admirable calling, an absolutely admirable calling. What? So you've been. I remember I watched the speech you did at a university, and there was this lady in the audience who was trying to grill you about Marxism or something about Marxism,
I
and
remember that.
you, I
Yeah,
think,
both states.
yeah, yeah, Boston. Yeah, you had a phenomenal response, by the way. You had an absolutely phenomenal response.
Thank you.
But we see a lot of people who are right of center speakers on the college lecture circuit and in general in popular media in America being lanced and just brutalized by many people on the sort of, I don't want to castigate the entire left, but a few radical elements of the left. And so you got a little bit of a taste of that. Has that same incident been repeated, or similar incident been repeated in the other speaking engagements you've done, or has that just been a one-off thing? And if it does happen, how do you imagine you'll handle it? I have this happen again, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah. That's the only time that it happened, and it honestly was a civil exchange. So I thought it was better with the exchange than
Yeah,
without it, because I love the contrast of ideas. I love having discussions with people I disagree with. It's actually a little boring when everybody agrees. Um,
precisely.
so that was good. And but if I were ever to get someone who just doesn't let me talk, or who's protesting against me or things like that.
Yeah,
I just don't care. I can protest against them too. I joined the protest and just protest against them. It's just like freedom of speech. They can do whatever. Just don't
right,
violate my own rights. Um,
right.
if they do violate my rights, then I'll just call the police. That's what the rule of law is.
Yeah.
I
Oh, yeah.
love the rule of law.
Yeah. You guys don't play. You guys don't play. You've organized a few protests too, haven't you?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to tell you about that. So I did have this. There's this radical leftist group who, they're almost a terrorist group, I would argue. It's called Code Pink. I don't know if you've heard about them. They're the ones who occupied the Venezuelan embassy in Washington, D.C. for weeks
Mm,
until they were pushed out by the D.C. police. And, so these people occupied property. They met with Maduro, their leader, travels to Venezuela and meets with Nicolas Maduro. So these are people who collaborate with a foreign dictator and get funds from him to travel there and perhaps who knows what else, right? Because they obviously don't have jobs if they can stay for weeks occupying another property.
hmm
So they follow Venezuelans who protest, and I was organizing this protest. We had one. We had like gone. I lived in Indianapolis before, and this guy was just like following us and taking pictures. So we took pictures of him, of course, in turn. And there were some cars who started going around the circle where we were protesting. We were not protesting. We were just like showing signs and trying to tell the public about what's going on in Venezuela, right? And this guy was yelling to us, Maduro is the president or whatever. And crazy, right? This American who
Oh
doesn't know
dear.
anything about Venezuela uh,
Precisely.
just yelling that he supports a dictator. Completely outrageous. And I was scared for the next protest whether they would do the same. So I just, preemptively called the police and told them, hey, this might happen. There's this communist group around. They've done this before. So the
Oh my
police
God.
knows what's going on. And that's all you can do. They're free to do whatever they want, but I do think that the U.S. government should investigate groups if they receive funding from foreign terrorist organizations.
hmm That sounds reasonable to me. Although let's talk on that point a little bit. So, and you've seen the U.S. government take a similar approach to Chinese companies that have tried to come in and take can't take over, but manage major organs and arteries of certain essential services like the internet, broadband, things of that sort.
Yeah,
Pharmaceutical companies. You've seen the government, U.S. government, and the Canadian government too, begin to push those kind of companies out. In your view, because you lived in a country that is now under authoritarian rule in which the government decides what's acceptable and what's not. In your view, how far is too far before the government begins to encroach upon someone's ability to operate freely in the country, non-violently in the country, even if they are being funded by or supported, I suppose, by a foreign government? How far is too far? Because
that's a
individuals
great
can,
question. And I think it's
yeah,
a question that we're going to grapple a lot, especially as we get out of the COVID crisis in the US. I
yeah,
think that the public sentiment against China in the United States is going to peak very soon. Um,
mm-hmm,
and there's going to be definitely actions against them. I, so I, I'm a classical liberal, you could say, which in the United States many people don't understand that term because it's kind of like
yeah,
conservative or libertarian. Um, but so I believe in natural rights, I believe in private property, but I believe in individuals have those rights, of course,
mm-hmm,
not governments. Chinese state-owned enterprises have no rights. They are the tool of a foreign government. They're not the tool of an independent Chinese businessman. So I
well,
do think that
yeah,
the US government has the reason to block all foreign state owned enterprises from investing in America if they so wish,
right. So,
especially if it's from a foreign enemy.
right. So, in principle, I would agree with you. Individuals have rights and everything. But so, uh, every government, every institution, whether it's a private institution held by individuals themselves or held by individuals with state authority, is a institution composed of individuals. Nonetheless, even the government is an institution composed of individuals that we deem necessary to have to give them the monopoly on force. So my question would become this: is it the government's involvement in private actions that make individuals who are running what is deemed to be a private service with government help,
Mhm.
does the government action in that realm make them illegitimate? Because, for example, let's look at TikTok, right? TikTok is a very popular app amongst folks around our age. Why? I have no clue. It perplexes me.
Yeah.
It's one of the most
I
annoying
just
things
can't
ever.
deal with another social media, and that's the whole reason I can't download it.
Yeah, it drives me up a wall. But it is a very famous, very popular app. People like to burn a lot of, their a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of energy into that nonsense. But anyway, it is essentially what Congress is calling a front for Chinese information gathering operations. But there are still thousands of people that work at TikTok, that maintain the app, maintain the website, all that kind of stuff, who are independent of that state-owned influence, even if the app itself is a product in part or in full of that state-owned influence. So do those individuals not have the same right to economic exchange just because the
Well,
government might be
if they are
involved?
state employees, so in this case, if it was a state-owned enterprise, which is not, state employees don't have the right to, impose their ideas upon others. Just like teachers in public schools don't have rights upon the students to push their ideas, right?
They shouldn't.
They shouldn't,
They
right? They
shouldn't.
shouldn't. But TikTok is a private enterprise. The question is that the owner may share information with the Chinese regime and everything. And if that's the case, then that's a national security concern. And the
Yes.
military is government intervention, but we need a military to protect ourselves, right? And I think even libertarians agree with that. Um,
Yes.
and if they don't agree, well, guess what? China is going to invade us or Russia.
Right.
So we need
Right.
a strong military.
The
Um,
Republic would fall. Yeah.
but so
Absolutely.
there are national security concerns, and you need to weigh those versus economic concerns. What's the economic benefit from this? What's the national security concern? And that's the kind of decision that the government is here for to do. I personally think, and I, in a democratic society, think we should not allow our information to be taken by a foreign authoritarian enemy that wants to do us harm. They steal our technology. We need to minimize that. And of course, that entails government intervention that I'm not happy with, but it's a trade off, right?
Right. Well, yeah. Any government intervention that is to preserve people's rights is legitimate. Is deemed legitimate by most libertarians, myself included. Uh, but there is concern because with the sanctions that Trump has imposed, they're not just affecting state actors in China; they're also affecting private actors in America as well. And so it's this idea, I think, that the Chinese is this collective enemy that America needs to face. But a lot of us don't realize or understand, or the politicians who are making these claims don't realize or understand, that the Chinese are numbered in the billions. There are a few hundred people at the upper echelons of the Chinese state, of the People's Republic of China, of the Politburo, who make a lot of the decisions. But I'm not entirely sure it's really fair or just to punish the over 1 billion citizens of China
Well,
who
well,
may be
the
laboring.
thing is that the U.S.
Yeah,
government is here to protect the American people, right?
right, should be.
So that's the primary goal of the US government. And if
Right.
that's the primary goal, then to do it, unfortunately, we're going to have to face a lot of hard truths about China. And that is that the Chinese government were benefiting economically a lot from their unfair trade practices.
Hmm.
In fact, there are accusations that some companies, American companies, are using slave labor in China from the Uyghur people, the religious and racial minority there.
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
unacceptable, Christian. We can,
I agree with you.
and even if the iPhone is gonna be cheaper, we should not allow slave labor to be used. In fact, it's illegal already for American companies to do it abroad. So we just need to enforce current law.
Well,
Um,
define slave labor. Do you mean like sweatshops, or what do you mean
a
slave labor?
slave means that you are not there voluntarily. That's all it means.
Right. That's wrong.
Not necessarily that you are paid or you're not, right? If you
Right.
can't quit your job, then you're a slave.
Right.
Um,
Right. I've heard that term inflated with sweatshops, and I think those things are manifestly different, as
No,
you know
cheap
already.
labor
So
is
I just
different.
yeah. Okay.
That's free trade and other things.
Right.
But I do think that human rights are important, and the United States it's the shining city on the hill, and we should not be benefiting from human rights violations abroad, and we should not also be putting American citizens at risk from a foreign regime that wants to hurt everyone. And if that's going to take some economic cost in the short term, then that cost needs to be weighed against the national security concern, and I think that it will be worth a trade-off.
Hmm. Well, I certainly hope that our leaders begin contextualizing national security and national security actions within the context of people's rights, because I think that that's probably the most important sort of political debate that we've been having for the past few centuries in this country, whether liberty or security is to be prioritized. I think it's a little bit of a false dichotomy, but it is still the debate people are having. So I hope that regardless of what happens, our leaders just make the right decision.
This is about preserving our liberty as well.
Right.
This is actually a trade-off that makes a lot of sense, because if we don't push back against China, we are not going to be free. I mean, this is an expansionist regime that actually collaborates with Maduro in Venezuela. They keep them in power with loans and buying their oil. They send, military advisors to Venezuela. In China, they try to expand on the South China Sea. They support Kim Jong-un in North Korea. It's the same with Russia. There is an international web of dictators that is working together, and democracies are fragmented. And if that's going to continue, then we're going to lose the fight against authoritarians. So they're going to continue expanding, and we're going to continue going in retreat, and we cannot allow that.
Mm-hmm. Well, it'll certainly be interesting to see how the geopolitical situation of this plays out. So last topic I want to talk to you about, the protest in Chile. So as you definitely know, and as many people should know, Chile is certainly the crown pinnacle, the crown jewel, the paragon of free marketeering and freedom in South America, bar none.
That's right.
Absolutely bar none. In fact, if there was any place in South America that I wanted to live, it's definitely Chile. But there is a collective group of people, of so-called oppressed middle class workers and immigrant workers, who have been pushing over the course of the last year up until very recently, and there's talks of their push continuing after COVID happens, against the government due to an imbalance in wealth distribution, so to speak. They're saying, why are there impoverished conditions in this country in some circumstances if we have so much material wealth? That's not just. And so they are using an arbitrary sense of justice to demand systemic changes to the Chilean government. And so far, the president has caved a little bit. He's shaken up his cabinet a little bit. I wanted to know what your opinion on that entire matter was.
Well, I think that we're seeing the rise, or we saw the rise pre-COVID, of radical leftist / feminist and environmentalist movements in Latin America, and especially in Chile. And they were actually successful in scheduling a constitutional referendum to completely rewrite the constitution. That was supposed to happen this month. Then the virus came, and of course, there's not going to be a referendum until this passes, which is great because the referendum, the polls were actually showing like 80% of the population were going to support to completely rewriting the constitution of a country that is doing better than anyone else in the region except the United States and Canada. It's completely ridiculous. Of course, there are a lot of problems in Chile, right? Like in the rest of Latin America, crime is relatively high. It's higher than in the United States, but it's lower than in the rest. But you don't need to completely rewrite the foundation of your nation to fix some specific problems like poverty or crime. Constitutions, or a piece of paper is not going to change the crime level or the poverty in Chile. They don't need to do that to change the policies. So what I'm concerned is that these radical leftist groups want to rewrite the constitution because this is a constitution that guarantees democracy and free markets. It's written in the constitution. You can't just nationalize things. So I'm concerned that they're just going to want to turn Chile into a socialist state, just like we did in Venezuela. Chavez, the first thing he did when he came to power was rewrite the constitution. And that's how dictators perpetuate their power. And what I'm most disappointed in Chile is that this didn't happen because a leftist was elected. It happened because a weak center-right president like Sebastián Piñera, who I liked before, gave in to their demands. And a stupid Supreme Court said that it was constitutional to do all this. It's ridiculous.
Right. right? They're at great danger of losing their country to
Like
faux socialism.
it's like, the same president who should want free markets is, leading his country into oblivion. It's truly a shame, and I hope that Chileans change their views before the referendum is held, and they give a clear sign that they want changes, but they don't want to destroy their country in the process.
Daniel, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it. Do you have any last words to say to people before I let you go?
I think that's it. Thank you so much for having me, Christian.
All right. Thank you guys for watching, and I will be with you in the next episode. Thanks.